So good afternoon. Thanks for coming. Just some introductions first. My name is Jim McDonald. I'm a lead cloud architect at Hess Corporation.
I'm Ira Bell. I co-founded Nimbo, and we're an advanced AWS partner. Do a lot of lift and shift type stuff, and also manage some of the workloads once they get up to the platform.
So a little background on Hess. Hess is a Fortune 100 firm. We are a leading global independent energy company primarily engaged in the exploration and production of natural gas and crude oil. We've got offices in over a dozen countries. In March of 2013, the company issued a press release that Hess would be exiting its downstream businesses and completing its journey on becoming a pure-play exploration and production company. So we talk about the downstream businesses. In an energy company, downstream is typically, and at Hess it's a terminal operations business, a refining business, energy marketing, retail operations, and a trading arm at Hess. So a significant footprint. I'm going to go through the animations here, too distracting. So if we looked at the divestiture snapshot as it relates to this project and migrating these businesses into AWS, specifically the businesses involved are our energy marketing business and our retail marketing business. Our energy marketing business, that sale was closed in January of 2014 for $1.2 billion. It took us about 6 months from start to finish to migrate that application footprint out of our on-premises data center into AWS. And it was sold to a company called Direct Energy. Our retail marketing business was sold. That deal was closed in October of 2014. It was sold for $2.8 billion to a company called Speedway. And we actually, half the time that we were able to migrate that into AWS, it took us about 3 months to migrate it from start to finish. So immediately on hearing that the company would be divesting its downstream businesses, after updating our LinkedIn profiles, the IT leadership started to get together to figure out how are we going to move the application footprint for these businesses. Because we knew, and we were actually told later by management, that the biggest risk or fear was our ability to migrate the applications and infrastructure in time for the close of sale. IT's ability was the single biggest risk, if you will. So IT management from all over the world, from Hess, started to get together and plan through the divestiture. We knew that our most significant footprints were our energy marketing businesses and our retail businesses. We knew that applications and data would need to be carved out. We didn't build this infrastructure thinking we were going to be selling the business. So businesses that were staying with Hess and businesses that were being divested were on the same servers, same application, same user data. So we were concerned about intellectual property. We were concerned about PII, personally identifiable information. We clearly didn't want employees that were not going with the divested companies to have their performance reviews, pay stubs accidentally going to the buyer, right? Wouldn't have been a good outcome. Our initial planning early on was we were going to do this the old way, meaning we were going to buy 300, 400, 500 servers, stage them in our data center as sort of a separate network segment, and then start migrating applications over to the new physical environment, new SAN storage, the whole works. Because of that, one of our concerns was after the close of sale, there would be then some period of time that it would take the buyer to move it out, and we would be caught supporting their hardware for them for a long period of time. We didn't want to be a data center provider. Late in the planning stages, we started to think more and more about this concept of using the cloud instead of our own data center. We liked the idea of it because, first and foremost, it would minimize our obligation to support the infrastructure post-close. We like this idea of cloud as an escrow account. Get everything up there right up until the point of the close of sale, and then we're out of that business. We hand it over and we're done. Rapid exit, we get out quick. Minimal upfront costs, low CapEx. Everybody likes that. Reduced time to provision, of course. At Hess, typically today with our on-premises environment, it probably takes anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks to build a new server instance. AWS, it's all over the place, right? Everybody's talking about minutes and hours, and for us it's true. Ability to fail fast and course correct, right? We took what I would say was an agile approach to this. Chunked the work in increments. We made mistakes. We tore the infrastructure down. We built it up again. And we did quite a bit of work looking at AWS's capabilities to support our legacy applications, and it was a home run for us. We had some crusty Windows 2003 applications, some old Power Builder that hadn't been updated in 15 years, and the environment supported all of us for us, so that was a win. So what did we do first? We got some quick wins. In July, we selected 2 very simple applications, an old Power Builder app that, again, was 15 years old, and a web app that ran on .NET, ran on a SQL Server backend, Windows Server 2008, no AD integration. We knew later if this was a success, we'd have to implement AD in AWS, but these 2 applications didn't need any Active Directory integration, so we wanted it to be simple. Spun up a couple of EC2 instances, just standard AMIs, installed the apps and data. It was 4th of July weekend, so I was running back and forth from the barbecue, flipping burgers, in the AWS console, building out instances. And we knew nothing about AWS, absolutely zero, right? And we were able to just do enough to get started to believe in the platform. At that point, when we succeeded and the applications worked fine, we realized, okay, we're probably in deep water. We're going to need to get some extra help, someone to do the heavy lifting, someone with more technical background in AWS. And that's when we engaged Nimbo for some help. I'll take 1 minute to sort of, at this point, I made the single biggest mistake of the whole implementation. And I'll say I was warned about this from my friends at Amazon, so I don't blame them for this. But never, ever set up your master account with the same email address as your Amazon.com account. Who can tell me what happens when I handed this account over to my friends at Direct Energy? They got all of my books, every one, and my Prime account. So I was able to get them back, but I flouted the advice. I ignored it. It clearly wasn't going to be a problem, but it was. So the opening slide, the divestiture snapshot, we said 6 months for energy marketing, 3 months for retail. So just to level set, the 6 months was the work, moving all the infrastructure and the applications. The cutover, when we cut over to production, was actually done over a weekend, right? So on Friday, we were running on premises. On Monday, we were running in AWS. Just some findings that helped us move this along so quickly. Infrastructure as code is your friend. Clearly, you could be creating instances and volumes with the console, clicking, pointing. But when Nimbo brought their guys in, anything we built that was more than 1 unit of something, code was hugely effective for us. We kept code libraries for repetitive tasks. As we started to assess the application footprint, what size instance does it need, what size disk volumes, we documented all that information in a very simple Excel spreadsheet. And then with the PowerShell script running off of the spreadsheet, instantiated the entire environment. I mean, we built, in our peak, we were building 100 or 150 servers in a single day. So for us, coming from sort of a traditional on-prem shop, it was hard to be believed. We started the migration work long before the buyers were even identified. So we believed so much in the effort, we believed so much that this was the right approach, that we were building this out long before the buyer was even known. I said before that we cut this over in 1 weekend. The way that was accomplished, we replicated every database and every file share for months before the cutover. So we used log shipping for the Oracle and SQL databases, and then on cutover weekend, we weren't worrying about moving hundreds of terabytes of data over the Direct Connect circuit. We had been incrementally moving it for months. We resisted the urge to re-architect any applications. This was a lift and shift operation. We were not optimizing this environment. So we stayed with the operating system. We stayed with the old crusty code. We left it exactly as it was. We opted for a Greenfield deployment. We wanted a clean start. We could have certainly done a VM import and brought the instances in as is. But the opportunity to get rid of legacy code that was no longer relevant to the application, I think really sort of helped us get more of a clean start. So the Greenfield deployment for us was our preferred approach. We had some very strong partnerships internally and externally. Folks like Nimbo helped us out on the phone quite a bit with Amazon. So, all of that sort of piled up to the success of the project. It's easy to think of this mostly as a technical project, because it is. But we focused quite a bit on the social aspects of this change. This was a big social change for the people and employees there that were critical for our success. Leadership buy-in all the way at the top to the CIO level. They were firm believers in our approach, communicating it frequently down to the rank and file every day. We felt pretty strongly about training. I apologize for that green color. It looks a little hard to read on. So training for us, we wanted and needed our employees, the developers, the architects, the security guys, to be engaged and bought into the plan. Nimbo did quite a few lunch and learns for us. Amazon was kind enough to come in and do some training classes. We could have certainly rolled this out, and the employees could have been, completely oblivious to the platform, but we wanted to get them excited. We wanted them on board, and the training was a big aspect of that. I think sort of the other guidance I would give folks thinking about a project like this is be comfortable with ambiguity. You're not going to know all the answers. You're not going to have this, well, you could try, have a big, elaborate waterfall plan, right? Proceed in chunks. Be okay with not knowing sort of the answer to everything. Just proceed regardless and get some wins under your belt.
Right. So when you have someone approach you and say, hey, we want to sell $4 billion in assets, and we're going to pick that up and put it in the cloud, your first gut is probably to say, as a consulting partner, yeah, we're going to do an assessment. Assessment seems to be kind of, it's basically in the dictionary for consulting, right? So, what does it mean? What do you do when you have some sort of challenge like that? Our position is that with cloud, that you really need to focus on the applications first. And we do a top-down and bottom-up approach. So top-down is definitely the applications, and then the bottom-up is sort of the infrastructure, kind of like the OSI model, just thinking like that in terms. So the most critical thing to look at for applications are the dependencies associated with them. So what data is coming in and out of them, what type of protocol it is, the frequency, the type, what applications interact with each other. And what we found was, in order to get that information, we had to essentially say to Hess, can we have a list of all of the applications in your environment? And it's hundreds of applications. And what we found was that, although there was always an application owner tied to an application, well, always is not actually accurate, very close to always an application owner tied to an application, that might not necessarily be the person who has the intimate knowledge of how the application works itself. And the reason for that is that in the Fortune space, a lot of applications will sort of be put in place, purchased or homegrown or whatever, and then maybe kind of passed along like a hot potato to different folks. And so it's really critical in the beginning when you find out who owns an application to kind of, find out whether they're actually the technical guru of that application. So we've kind of coined a phrase called application guru. And the short of it is you would want to just take that list of applications and sort it by the application gurus and find the application gurus who sort of own the most applications all the way down to the least and start scheduling time with those folks. And you have to remember that they're going to be a bit apprehensive, most likely, especially in a divestiture. It's a large social dynamics play because you're kind of coming in and you're saying, to someone's who perhaps owns an empire and maybe a little bit, like I said, apprehensive, that you need to kind of pick their brain and have them do a knowledge transfer with you. But again, the key thing you're trying to figure out is what are those dependencies? Because if you pick something up, it may break something else. Like maybe it has a back-end hook into SAP that you weren't aware of, and that breaks an entire chain of processes. And so that was kind of the main focus with the application inventory and the interface dependencies. You do need to tie it all together with the inventory of hardware. So you need to be thinking about prod, dev, test, UAT, understanding kind of how the servers are named, if there is a consistent pattern with that and that type of thing. And then tying all those kind of things together for what I'd call a complete application portfolio. Because it is cloud, you do want to take a look at what we'd call special operating systems and unique workloads. So Linux is maybe not unique to most, but to Hess it was a unique workload. And then Windows 2000 and 2003 server platforms, just because they're older, and of course the bitness, as I think our friend Bill Young coined bitness. So 32-bit OSs and things like that, which may have some memory stuff going on. And then we, as part of the assessment, kind of took a look at what made sense to go in a big bang approach, or should we kind of objectize some of these pieces and move them over and have a coexistence period. The last bit I'd mention is that it's really important for cloud to take a look at any workloads that have high compute requirements, high memory requirements, and definitely high IOPS, so the high I/O for the disks and that type of thing. That'll help you with your costing exercises and that sort of thing. So all in, what did we move, right? Well, it's two companies totaling $4 billion, so a pretty vast landscape. There were over 500 servers, 750 terabytes of storage, which had provisioned IOPS. So pretty significant data warehouse type loads hitting those and those types of things. Again, that social dynamics play I talked about, you have thousands of users spread across multiple continents. So you have different time zone restraints. You have meetings that you need to facilitate when you're not there in person. You can't make eye contact with people. You can't say, I'm not here to harm you. So you have to kind of think about that from context. We already talked about the mix of different Windows workloads. From a software landscape, pretty much you name it. Different flavors of SQL and Oracle, some homegrown custom apps, some that don't have the original author of them anywhere around to be found, or the repository of code. Some vendor applications. So in doing any sort of project like this, it behooves you to always kind of front load anything, like getting in touch with the vendors for every single application, even if you don't think you're going to have a problem with it. Finding out who you can escalate things through in that context. Is it supported where you're headed? And then the infrastructure and services, Citrix was a big part of both of these for remote access for the experience, using NetScalers for scaling those Citrix environments out where necessary. F5 was in place, so we like to use that going forward. I'll show you that for kind of our firewalling type stuff. And then a selection of some other Microsoft, the integration stack of BizTalk, Active Directory, and SharePoint, and file and print share. So, I mean, it's a very traditional, huge enterprise environment, so just about a full flavor of everything. So when we started moving stuff to AWS, we initially created a VPC in the US East region because we felt that would be closest to where the physical assets were at the time. Hess's headquarters is or may no longer be, but Woodbridge, New Jersey, and so we just said let's put it in the east, and then we went ahead and started with just a tunnel, an IPsec tunnel, using a circuit, just an inert circuit over the VPN. And then we eventually, once we started getting some more things up there, went ahead and enabled a direct connect, which is a really advisable thing to do, I think, for any company who's getting started in the cloud or looking to expand their data center so you have near infinite scalable resources. We tried to follow best practices where we could, while still kind of maintaining the, not re-architect or, refactor applications or change the current landscape, but, doing the things that you would expect, like creating private and public subnets, and then, trying to design to ensure that we were meeting compliance regulations for PCI and that type of thing. Security groups, this is important. Thinking about how you group things up so that you can objectize certain roles, tasks, and responsibilities and that type of thing, so you're not doing one-off types of things, which later you kind of go, what does Saturday inbound mean? I don't understand. So trying to think about naming those appropriately and being able to add different folks to those. We implemented Splunk for PCI, and we also implemented a product called Duo Security for multi-factor authentication. MFA is a pretty hot topic these days, if you guys don't know about it. It's a really nice thing to put in place. So for backups, we were snapshotting the images nightly for 30 days, and then we had all types of other things going on. We're pushing the data into Amazon's Simple Storage Service, S3, and then kind of tearing that off to Glacier. And then we were expiring that content to delete it so that we weren't just racking up unnecessary storage. I mean, the purpose was make sure the environment's holistic and working and everything like that. Let's get it into the position where the buyer has a solid amount of backups, so they can see what's going on and that type of thing, and they have a process in place for themselves that they're comfortable with, but not spending more money than necessary, but really taking advantage of some of those features. The other thing I would call out is that, I did mention the F5 and NetScaler and Citrix already. Sophos for VPN, they're here at the conference. But the key is that we're able to pull those from the Amazon Marketplace, which I think is really cool. And so instead of kind of interacting with an additional vendor, you can just sometimes go right through the marketplace and feed that right through your AWS spend. All right, so this is a busy slide, but one of my favorite because as an owner of a cloud compute company, I think when you see more objects that are consumable in cloud in a deployment, then you're probably doing a better job because those items are likely more elastic and tailored to the solution. They're, again, objectized. I keep repeating that. But it allows you to scale the things that you need for what they are. Instead of having one VM running one thing that's super high memory and everything else, and maybe or maybe not a single point of failure, you're breaking out those services so that they can be used and consumed as they're needed. And also, there's a team behind them who are writing those services to do exactly what they do best, right? So I'll kind of work our way around just for those of you who aren't familiar with the items, but EC2 is the Amazon Elastic Cloud Compute. That's the VM space, and of course the Elastic Block Storage rolls up under that, and that's where you'd find those provisioned IOPS disks. Amazon S3, and then the Glacier down there are the storage tiers. So S3 is a really nice blob storage, has some great encryption capabilities and that type of thing, extremely cheap. CloudWatch we use for monitoring those workloads. IAM, we use those for our security groups. There's some really nice integration features with that that have just been released. Amazon's simple email service, and we use that just to hook into the API and send some things out for applications that may be formally used, I guess Exchange or some other type of SMTP service, but we just took advantage of something right in the platform. Amazon's RDS service for database stuff, and that's helpful when you want to maybe reduce the management aspect or operational control of databases and kind of get into more of a platform context, right? I've already mentioned Glacier, the low-tier storage, especially for archival. It's fantastic. Direct Connect, again, that's a dedicated line to connect into data centers and really fantastic for low-latency connections. Elastic Beanstalk is very much, to me, like a platform as a service type offering. Everybody might describe it differently, but being able to take some code and deploy it to, almost like a container, right? But almost like a packaged file that essentially can be scaled out and spun up and available. We use that for some custom backup tools to hook into S3 and some other types of things. Route 53 is Amazon's DNS offering, which is really cool. We had that in front of our VPC and also other items in AWS like S3. And I think that about sums it up. VPC, yeah, the Amazon's virtual private cloud. All right. So here's a architecture diagram, and I apologize if it's difficult to read. It's also, I would say, somewhat dumbed down. It's a little bit more complex than that, but the key things to call out on the right, I just wanted to show you that you can have a direct connect in place and also have an IPsec VPN tunnel behind it for a failover, so that if your telco fails, which you should plan for things failing in the cloud as a best practice, but if your telco provider fails on a direct connect, then you can default over to that IPsec tunnel and continue to have access. It may be degraded a bit just because maybe you're depending on super low latency, but at least you'll still be able to connect to your systems and keep your environments connected. You can see the concept of availability zone 1 and availability zone 2 on the very bottom there. Amazon has a really great feature in that you can kind of have items deployed to different areas, which, if a whole zone should go down, then you have a better shot at not two of those going down at the same time. So in this particular deployment, you can see that Devon UAT is in one, and we have, for the private subnets of the availability zone 1, we have some other stuff like our typical EC2 instances, Citrix farms, and that type of thing. But for availability zones, you would want to deploy things that are dependent on each other in separate, they call them AZs. So let's say that you have two front-end servers, like two IIS servers. You might want to put one IIS server in AZ1 and one IIS server in AZ2, so that while they're load balanced, if one AZ goes down, you still have the advantage of having that other AZ up. So we had a public-facing subnet. This is all done in VPC. It's really nice. It gives a nice layer of security getting into them through NAT instances. You can see that the Sophos for the VPN is sitting up there in the public subnet, as well as the NetScaler for the Citrix, and then the F5 for the firewall pieces. And then again, you can see up there that we have the Route 53 allowing us to get in from the internet into the VPC. And then S3 is shown not in the VPC because it's just a service that you can consume in AWS, and it's part of your subscription, but not necessarily something that you put in the VPC.
So a couple more slides, and then we'll wrap it up. I tried to capture what I thought for Hess were some really defining moments that sort of crystallized for us our confidence in the platform and the decision that we made. The picture here is an actual picture of a New York City street. For the direct energy migration for our energy marketing business, we entered an agreement with the buyer that we would run the environment in production for a month just to work out if there were any bugs or any performance problems. We still would have a short-term responsibility to fix it. It turns out that the very first week we went in production, we were forecast for about a foot of snow on the northeast. Now, we had built out a Citrix environment, but we didn't build it out for pretty much 90% of the employees to be working from home hitting our Citrix environment. So 2 or 3 days before the snow, when the weatherman was pretty much certain that we were going to get slammed, the Nimbo guys cloned our Citrix servers, basically doubled the capacity of the environment and had them warmed up, and then attached them the night before the storm. Sure enough, we got blasted. Everybody was working from home. We sort of issued an email for people not to come in for safety reasons. And we met the demand for all those remote Citrix users without any issues. After everybody shoveled out in a couple of days, we spun down the environment back to normal, and we were back in action. So just this ability to apply double the servers in minutes was eye-opening for us. Our VPC IP addressing turned out to be an interesting exercise. As you may or may not know, when you select a VPC, you also select an IP address range, a CIDR block range to that VPC. When we built it up, as I said, we started earlier. We didn't know who the buyer was, so we picked an IP range that was not in conflict with Hess. Unfortunately, when the buyer came on, they weren't happy with that IP range because it overlapped with their own, and they weren't ready to accept the environment with those conflicts. So infrastructure as code is your friend again. We scripted out dropping the VPC, dropping the instances, recreating the VPC, spinning up all those instances and attaching them again with the new subnet addresses. A couple of hours, 150 servers down, 150 servers back up, and we were in good shape. So it's really, again, another eye-opener. The legal handover of the environment took us all of 30 minutes. So on the day when the paperwork was signed with the buyer to transfer ownership of these billion-dollar companies, we met in a room. The buyer had created a master account with their own credentials a few nights before. We modified our master account email address to change it to the buyer's, removed the Hess IM users to remove our liability of having access to the environment. We gave them the MFA key, and we were done. Half an hour, that environment is legally transferred over. 350 servers, just like that. Ira had shown before, there was a picture. We replaced our entire tape backup system for these businesses with just S3 and PowerShell, a couple pages of PowerShell. It blew our infrastructure guys away. But it was a fantastic story. I guess the last thing I would say is, when we did the first migration, because we did these sequentially, we didn't do them at the same time. We were delighted at Hess. I mean, we thought it was fantastic. We felt sort of vindicated. We made the deadlines, obviously. We definitely asked ourselves, were we really lucky? Was there some combination of being good and having the right partners? But we did it again. We did it in half the time, somewhat smaller environment. But our confidence now that this was the right approach is just way up there. So, I think the experience for us has been phenomenal. I hope that you don't take this as, this is just relevant to a divestiture situation. It's not something that I wish upon anybody. But I think anybody that's interested in looking at lifting and shifting their applications and infrastructure in the cloud could probably take a lot of our use cases away from this and feel confident that it's the right thing to do. Anything from you to wrap up?
That's good. Yeah, thanks a lot. We wanted to open it up for questions. The session is meant for 45 minutes, so we have 15 left. If anybody has any questions, we're happy to field anything anything you've got. Otherwise, we can, I guess dismiss you or whatever they would say. So, but our email addresses are up there as well. So yes, I'll start with you. Yeah.
Does this mean that Hess is also now looking at taking its existing retained corporate IT and moving it out to AWS?
So the Downstream Business is completely headquartered in Woodbridge, New Jersey, right? So we are essentially moving everything out of that building to prepare the building to be sold to somebody else. So our corporate office in New York is, everything is migrating to our Houston facility. So today, Hess Houston, their production environment is in a colo facility, Cyrus One, and their dev test environment, they're evaluating clouds right now.
Somebody else. Yeah.
You mentioned you were doing more application reinstallation. What percentage of that, was it all 100% reinstallations? When you're trying to find these application moves, how did you do reinstallations? To learn about knowledge.
Well, we had most of the source code. There were maybe one or two situations where we had trouble finding the source code, right? Off-the-shelf software, we would just go to the vendor. We had Visual Source Safe for our .NET applications. There's a Power Builder source code control tool. I couldn't even tell you what the name of it is. But the installation was less of a problem. What really turned out to be challenging was the interfaces, right? I mean, we had batch jobs, that were 15 years old, and you forget about them. Service accounts, you forget. Nobody knows the service account password. So moving the applications was less of a problem than, discovering when things broke, where were they? I mean, we had utility servers with thousands of jobs on them that, people had left the company, were dead. I mean, it was, so what those applications talked to was sort of the tricky part. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yes. Yeah. So we're an EDI shop, right? So quite a bit of EDI for both of those businesses. And our EDI runs on a platform called GXS or GSX. I can never get that right. But it's IBM AIX Unix. So that could not be moved. For retail had a Netezza data warehouse appliance, big physical appliance to crunch numbers really quickly now. So, longer term, if I had owned the environment, I probably would have thought about Redshift, but you can't move a Netezza into AWS.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I mean, I think, again, that's probably a case of why hybrid is here for a while in some context. You can't always assume that everything can go right up. I think you should always try and look at everything and kind of take the why not approach.
The challenges of, because I said it before, we knew that the buyers were going to co-occupy our building for some period of time. And it made everybody nuts from a security perspective because, oddly enough, the parent company of both buyers were also in the energy industry. So we didn't want them, we were uncomfortable with having direct access to the network, having too many application servers. We certainly didn't want to share the same domain, the Active Directory domain. So this was move as much as we could, but we knew we couldn't move everything. Energy marketing, I would say we probably moved about 95%. Retail is probably like 70.
Sorry, yeah.
Why not move the VMs instead?
So why didn't we do the VM imports? We tried it early on, and like I said, these were shared servers. A lot of the servers were shared, so applications from businesses we weren't divesting. So I didn't want to migrate those applications with them. I wanted to cherry pick, application A, application B, file share B. And I know it sounds like a lot of work, but it seems counterintuitive. It wasn't. It was fun. It went very quickly.
For doing that, though, there are a lot of projects where you would do VM imports and that type of thing. The key there is to think about when do you abort? What is the success criteria? Meaning, if it gets up there, does someone now need to go and test it and say, hey, it's working? What's the sign off? Do you later get rid of the on-premises object maybe that was in there? Do you change the name of the server? Do you need to modify the network interface card settings because it's now going elsewhere and that type of thing? And you'll find if you're migrating hundreds and hundreds of servers and doing VM imports that you start to have things stagger, because you may have a block scheduled and then somebody calls in sick who's responsible for this, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, you have all these things in different states. So our guys wrote a very simple workflow tool that it's very straightforward. It has infinite objects and infinite nodes, or I may be saying it backwards, but the concept is you would just put all of your VM names and then identify all of the steps in the process, and then just kind of, and you can do it in Excel, but you would want to make sure that at each step of the way, you either have we're waiting on someone, who is that person, what's the next action item, and again, that abort, don't forget that word. If you're ever doing VM imports, you need to define every time at what point you would abort, because the business needs to go on. So if you're scheduling your maintenance windows and it's not proceeding, or it's not proceeding exactly as planned, do you get an extension for a couple of hours to play around with it while you hash it out, or do you abort? And we feel in the enterprise that it's much better to just abort. Just like, think of a space shuttle on the platform. You'd want to, if there's any indication of anything going on, the wind speed's a little bit higher than you like, and you're probably going to be okay, just abort.
And I think if it got down to crunch time and for whatever reason, we couldn't install it fresh, we would have, but we didn't have to import not one.
Yeah.
So, sure.
Yes.
Are you still managing this for the buyer?
Yeah. Oftentimes, I think, so Nimbo's fortunate position, I think, is, because we'll have that sort of intimate knowledge, I can tell you that conducting an M&A process where you lift it up and then you're managing it kind of while it's there, and then when the cutover's going on, there's got to be a sort of, I guess what's the term for China, iron wall or something. You can't share information, and that goes for Amazon as well. So Amazon's teams, for example, they're the team that was going to be receiving this infrastructure for their new client had to remain virtually in the dark. Now it's up to the seller what they want to disclose to the buyer, but that's not your deal. That's so I would say you have to be kind of very mindful about what information can be disclosed and how you facilitate that process. But very often we found that the buyer would want to retain us to continue to make sure that stuff flies well in the escrow environment. And also both buyers are still continuing to run that infrastructure in AWS. And at least for one of them, because the other one is more recent, so I think they're still figuring it out. But at least for one of them, the first one, Direct Energy, kind of did a full 180 and has at first they were kind of apprehensive about cloud, and now they're looking at making a very drastic change. So I think that's fantastic. So, yeah. Yes, sir. Oh.
The tape storage replacement.
Yeah.
Describe that a little bit more, and was that on site?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a picture of it.
Can you go back? So
I blew through the slides. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So I'm not going to give you the vendor and who runs it first, right? But we've got one of these cabinet units, and as the business gets bigger, they bolt on new cabinets, and it's I don't know 40 feet long in our data center, right? And that operates around the clock. It's got a robot arm that pulls tapes out. I'm not a tape backup specialist, but so that was. I mean, we were. It's a fairly large business, right? All that downstream business, all those applications were being hosted in the data center, and that was our backup system. And then they would, that thing spits out the tapes, and they would drive them off-site, and we would have off-site backup as well. So our infrastructure guys, I was dreading this meeting because they demanded a meeting with Nimbo to talk about backups. Tell me how backups are going to work, and they walked out half an hour later, I believe, with Bill, and they were thrilled, right? And we've never had to restore an AWS backup because of an EBS failure. We've had to restore them for user failures, right? And we didn't really talk about it, but our backup solution for AWS, or strategy, I wouldn't call it a solution. We had the S3 backups, every volume backed up every night in production, And then we still had traditional SQL Server backups for point-in-time restorations, right? So the log files were backed up as well and then moved off eventually into Glacier. So point-in-time ability for SQL databases, and then nightly for everything else file shares, and with 30 days retention.
Cool. There's one over here. Yeah.
Now that Hess has kind of done a lift and shift of your applications, are there any future plans to do any sort of cloud maturity, like take more advantage of AWS platform?
So it's a good question. Retail is kind of interesting because if you didn't follow it in the news, it's not a big deal. But for a while, so we always knew energy marketing was going to be a straight divestment. We were going to sell it to somebody else, and that was it. Retail, there was a lot of discussion internally about spinning it off into a new company. And so we had started the AWS work for retail, actually thinking that there was going to be a group of us that were going to go work for them and own it. And so, yeah, we would have definitely followed a different maturity path if we had owned it, right? When you're divesting it, you're divesting it, you're not optimizing it. It's pure lift and shift. Now the buyers, I hope they do. We've talked about some of the things they could do to lower costs, like maybe shut down test and dev at night. Think about reserved instances. I'm somewhat wistful, I guess, because I had this big toy box that if retail had spun, we could have done some great things with it. So.
Anyone else got a question?
Good questions.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Question. Yeah.
Small crowd, but it was good questions, so thank you.
Awesome.